February 14, 1942. Basement of Converse Laboratory, Harvard University. The chemical breakthrough. A match flared in the darkness as Professor Louis Fieser lit a small sample of jellied gasoline. The flame did not explode like ordinary fuel. It stuck, burned, and refused to go out. Aluminum naphthenate and aluminum palmitate, Fieser noted in his laboratory diary, create a gel consistency similar to applesauce, which then thickens into rubber. The 42-year-old organic chemistry professor set down his pen and reached for the secure phone. What he had just created would change the nature of the war in the Pacific. A weapon that could penetrate the deepest caves, breach the strongest bunkers, and destroy what bombs could not touch. Professor Fieser had no idea that his Valentine's Day discovery would lead to the most devastating incendiary campaign in military history. The Pacific War taught American forces a brutal lesson. Japanese defenders did not surrender. They dug in, fortified, and fought from positions that conventional weapons could not destroy. The volcanic islands of the Pacific offered the perfect defensive terrain. Honeycombed caves through the rock, concrete bunkers reinforced with coral, underground passages that stretched for miles. Iwo Jima alone contained 11 miles of underground fortifications. The defenders of Okinawa turned ancient burial tombs into machine gun nests. Conventional bombs ricocheted. Artillery shells barely scratched the surface. Something new was needed. Something that could reach the depths where Japanese soldiers waited. The answer came from an unlikely source, a Harvard chemistry professor who was working on synthetic rubber when the war broke out. A man who initially opposed the development of poison gas, but swallowed his pride when his country called. Louis Frederick Fieser, born in Columbus, Ohio, on April 7, 1899, who spent years synthesizing vitamin K and studying blood coagulation, was about to become the father of modern incendiary warfare. The first field test took place on July 4, 1942, not at some remote military facility, but on the Harvard football field, between the business school and the stadium. Fieser placed 45 pounds of his new compound in a shallow pool of water. The Cambridge Fire Department watched nervously. Tennis players on nearby courts had no idea what was about to happen. The white phosphorus initiator triggered the napalm. Flaming globes of gel erupted into the air, splashing onto the water, where they continued to burn. The tennis players screamed and scattered. The gel stuck to everything it touched. Water could not extinguish it. It burned at temperatures ranging from 800 to 1,200 degrees Celsius. Fieser's calculations were precise. His new weapon burned 6 times hotter than termite. Unlike gasoline, which exploded in a massive fireball, napalm was projected in a narrow stream that could be directed into cave openings, bunker slits, and pillboxes. The aluminum soap compounds gave it a consistency that made it adhere to surfaces, uniforms, and skin. Standard incendiary bombs achieved kills in one attack every 60 attempts in early tests. Napalm achieved success in 1 attack out of 3. The statistics were convincing, but the chemistry was revolutionary. Production began immediately at Nuodex Products. In mid-April 1942, they developed a brown dry powder that appeared harmless. Mixed with gasoline, it turned into something terrifying. The Chemical Warfare Service ordered thousands of tons. Dow Chemical increased production. In 1943, America was producing 500,000 pounds of napalm. In 1944, that number rose to 8 million. The M69 incendiary bomb was designed specifically for the delivery of napalm. Each bomb weighed 6.2 pounds and contained jellied gasoline that spread over a diameter of 15 feet. 38 M69 units were packed into an E-46 cluster bomb. When dropped from altitude, the cluster would open at 2,000 feet, scattering the individual bombs over a target zone. But first, napalm would see combat in Europe. In August 1943, American forces used it during the Allied invasion of Sicily. However, its true test would come against Japanese fortifications that proved impenetrable to conventional attack. July 22, 1944. Tinian Island, Marianas Chain. The Pacific debut. Captain Robert Johnson of the 2nd Marine Division watched the Army Air Force fighter bombers approach from the east. These did not carry conventional bombs. The aircraft were loaded with the first napalm weapons to be used in the Pacific theater. The incendiary gel, shipped in secret from Hawaii, was about to be tested against an enemy that had turned defense into an art form. The Japanese garrison on Tinian, commanded by Colonel Kiyoshi Ogata, had spent months preparing defensive works. The 50th Infantry Regiment and attached units, nearly 9,000 men, dug caves into the island's coral cliffs. Machine gun nests covered every approach. Artillery was hidden in reverse slope positions, immune to naval bombardment. When the first napalm bombs fell on Tinian, Marines watching from Saipan, only 6 miles away, witnessed something unprecedented. Instead of the sharp explosions of high-explosive bombs, orange flames rolled over the Japanese fortifications like a wave of fire. The incendiary mixture penetrated cave openings, flowed into bunkers, and seeped through firing slits. Japanese soldiers who had survived weeks of naval bombardment fled their positions with burning uniforms. The glowing oil adhered to everything. Stopping, dropping, and rolling only spread it further. Water from canteens made it splatter. The only escape was to abandon the position entirely. Marine Corporal James Chen, watching through binoculars, noted in his diary, "The Japs came out of holes we didn't even know existed. They rolled in the dirt, trying to put it out, but the fire kept burning." Within days, Marine units were requesting napalm strikes before every advance. Japanese emplacements that required hours of costly assault to neutralize were cleared in minutes. Tinian fell on August 4th. Of the 9,000 Japanese defenders, only 313 survived. The success on Tinian was just the beginning. On Saipan, Marine flame tank operators discovered that portable flamethrowers achieved similar effects at close range. The M2 flamethrower could project thick fuel up to 40 yards, but operators carrying 70 pounds of fuel on their backs had a casualty rate exceeding 90% once they revealed their position. The solution came from the Navy Seabees, who modified Sherman tanks with CB-H-1 flamethrowers. These Zippo tanks, as the Marines called them, could project liquid fire up to 150 yards, providing armored protection for the operators. 8 of these tanks landed on Iwo Jima on February 19, 1945. What happened next would demonstrate the terrifying effectiveness of napalm against the most fortified positions in the Pacific. February 23, 1945. Iwo Jima, the volcanic inferno. Corporal Herschel "Woody" Williams crawled toward a Japanese pillbox, dragging his M2 flamethrower through the volcanic ash. His unit had been halted by interlocking fields of fire from concrete emplacements. Artillery had not worked. Naval fire had failed. A conventional assault meant suicide. Williams could see the barrel of a Japanese Type 92 machine gun protruding from a firing slit. Bullets sparked off the steel tanks on his back. 20 yards, 15 yards. At 10 yards, he triggered the initiator. A stream of thick fuel shot through the slit. The bunker became a furnace. Internal temperatures exceeded those of a crematorium in seconds. The concrete itself began to crack due to thermal shock. Steel reinforcing bars warped and bent. The machine gun barrel turned cherry red, then white, and then melted. No one inside could have survived more than a few seconds. Williams crawled to the next position, an underground complex connected by passages. He noticed a ventilation shaft only 6 inches wide. The flamethrower nozzle fit perfectly. A pull of the trigger sent the flaming gel flowing throughout the system. Japanese soldiers emerged from hidden exits 50 yards away, their bodies enveloped in flames that could not be extinguished. In 4 hours, Williams neutralized 7 major fortifications. Positions that had held up an entire regiment of Marines were cleared by one man with a flamethrower. He would receive the Medal of Honor for his actions, but the true hero was the weapon he carried. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, the Japanese commander on Iwo Jima, had spent a year turning the island into a fortress. His defensive doctrine was simple: make the Americans pay for every yard with blood. His 21,000 troops dug miles of passages through the solid volcanic rock. They had stockpiled food, water, and ammunition for a months-long siege. Kuribayashi had studied American tactics and knew their dependence on superior firepower. He positioned his defenses on reverse slopes, where naval guns could not reach. He forbade banzai suicide attacks, ordering his men to fight in fortified positions until death. He believed he had created an impregnable defense. He did not count on napalm. The modified Sherman tanks arrived on the second day of battle. Captain Frank Caldwell of the 26th Marine Regiment watched the first Zippo tank advance on an underground fortress that had resisted 2 days of assault. The tank's flamethrower erupted, sending a stream of flaming oil 100 yards into the mouth of the cave. The incendiary mixture flowed like water, finding every passage, every chamber, every hiding place. The whole mountain seemed to exhale smoke, Caldwell reported. Then we heard the screams. Japanese soldiers emerged from the caves, their clothes and skin on fire. Those who managed to get out were cut down by the Marines. Those who stayed inside were incinerated. The underground complex, which military planners estimated would take a week to clear, was neutralized in 20 minutes. The 8 flame tanks on Iwo Jima consumed 10,000 gallons of thick fuel per day. Each tank required a support team of Seabees for maintenance and refueling. Electrician Joseph Klein and fitter J.T. Patterson worked day and night to keep the weapons operational, often under enemy fire. The psychological impact was immediate. Japanese soldiers who had fought fearlessly against conventional weapons fled at the sight of the flamethrower tanks. Radio intercepts revealed growing panic in Japanese communications. Words like demon fire and dragon tanks appeared in decoded messages. Private Toshio Yamada, one of the few Japanese survivors of Iwo Jima, later testified, "We were trained to die for the emperor. We were prepared for bullets, grenades, and even bayonets. But the fire was something else. It entered our caves like a living being. You couldn't fight it. You couldn't hide from it. It found everyone." In March 1945, napalm proved so effective that General Curtis LeMay made a decision that would change the course of the war. If the incendiary gel could clear caves and bunkers, what could it do to cities? March 9, 1945, 5:34 p.m. Northfield, Guam, Operation Meeting House. Major General Curtis LeMay watched the first of 334 B-29 superfortresses roll down the runway. Each bomber carried a lethal load, 40 cluster bombs containing 1,520 M69 incendiary devices. Their target, Tokyo. LeMay had struggled for months with high-altitude precision. Bombing? The jet streams over Japan pushed the bombers off course. Cloud cover obscured the targets. Anti-aircraft fire at 30,000 feet was deadly accurate. The results were dismal. After taking command of the 21st Bomber Command in January 1945, LeMay knew he needed to try something different, or face dismissal. The arithmetic of destruction was compelling. One incendiary cluster could destroy an area of 100 feet by 300 feet. Tokyo's residential districts were densely populated with wooden houses, paper walls, and straw mats. Japanese war production depended on thousands of small factories scattered throughout residential areas. What precision bombing could not hit, the area incendiary attack could destroy. LeMay removed the defensive weapons from the B-29s to carry more armament. He ordered them to fly at night, at low altitude, between 5,000 and 9,000 feet. The lower altitude would improve accuracy and place them below the effective range of Japanese anti-aircraft guns. Pathfinder aircraft arrived over Tokyo shortly after midnight on March 10th. They marked the target area, a 3-by-4-mile residential district housing 750,000 people, with incendiary bombs in an X pattern. The main force followed, dropping 1,065 tons of incendiaries in streams that created a grid of fire. In 30 minutes, individual fires merged into a firestorm. The heat at ground level approached that of molten lava. The superheated air created winds exceeding 100 miles per hour, sucking the oxygen out of air raid shelters and feeding the flames with fresh air. Concrete boiled, steel melted. The Sumida River turned to steam. Fire Captain Susumu Takahashi of the Tokyo Fire Department recorded his final report at 12:48 a.m. Fire out of control. Equipment useless. The city is dying. The Tokyo Fire Department had 8,000 men, 1,000 pieces of equipment, and exactly 3 ladder trucks capable of reaching beyond 30 feet. They had trained for conventional bombings, prepared for normal fires. Nothing had prepared them for this hell. The gel stuck to their equipment, melted their hoses, turned their water into scalding steam. By dawn, 16 square miles of Tokyo had been incinerated. Conservative estimates place the death toll at 7,500, although Japanese sources suggest more than 100,000 perished that night. More people died in the Tokyo firestorm than would die in either of the atomic bombings. 1 million were left homeless. Sergeant James Kerr, a tail gunner on a B-29, reported, "At 5,000 feet, you could smell the scent of burning flesh. The thermal updrafts from the fire were so strong they tossed our 65-ton bomber like a leaf." But LeMay was just getting started. The systematic incineration of Japan had begun. March 11th brought the destruction of Nagoya, when 313 B-29s eliminated the Mitsubishi aircraft engine plant and the surrounding districts. 2 days later, the industrial heart of Osaka was consumed by flames that burned for 72 hours. March 16th saw the port facilities and shipyards of Kobe reduced to twisted metal and ash. In 10 days, incendiary attacks destroyed more Japanese industrial capacity than 2 years of conventional bombing. The Air Force was consuming napalm faster than American factories could produce it. Emergency production facilities were established. In June 1945, monthly production reached unprecedented levels. The tactical lessons learned in clearing caves on the islands were being applied strategically to Japan itself. April 1st, 1945. Okinawa, the final crucible. If Iwo Jima had been difficult, Okinawa was something worse. The island's 450,000 civilians were trapped between 100,000 Japanese defenders and 180,000 American attackers. The Japanese turned every tomb, every cave, every hill into a defensive bastion. Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima had learned from Iwo Jima. His troops dug deeper, fortified more, and prepared for the flame attack. They installed water reservoirs in caves, created fire breaks in passages, and, developed rudimentary protective equipment with wet cloths and mud. It proved useless. The 713th Tank Battalion had been entirely converted into flame tanks for Okinawa. 54 Sherman tanks equipped with Ronson flamethrowers capable of projecting incendiary jets from 60 to 80 yards. Navy chemical units prepared 250,000 gallons of thickened fuel. Each Marine company had attached flamethrower teams. The battle for Wana Ridge demonstrated the evolution of napalm as a tactical weapon. Japanese defenders had created interconnected fortifications on reverse slopes, immune to artillery and aerial attack. Marines of the 1st Division spent 3 days trying to advance 100 yards, suffering massive casualties. On May 14th, the Marines implemented an innovative tactic. They transported barrels of the incendiary mixture to the top of the ridge, punctured them with rifle fire, and rolled them into the Japanese positions. White phosphorus grenades ignited the flowing gel. The entire trench became a cauldron of flames. Defensive works that had resisted for days were cleared in hours. Private First Class Eugene Sledge, watching the attack, wrote, "The Japanese came running out of caves we didn't know existed, with their clothes and bodies on fire. Some tried to surrender, but it was too late. The napalm had already done its job. They collapsed after a few steps, with the fire still burning even after they were dead." The psychological impact on Japanese civilians was devastating. Thousands had taken shelter in caves following military instructions. When the flame tanks approached, they faced an impossible choice: burn in the caves or emerge under machine gun fire. On May 30th, Marines discovered a cave containing 450 civilians near Shuri Castle. Lieutenant John Stevens, of the 6th Marine Division, tried to convince them to surrender. When they refused, military necessity prevailed. The flame tank crew gave 3 warnings in Japanese. No response. The flamethrower fired, sending its deadly stream into the depths of the cave system. Stevens later testified, "We could hear them screaming for 5 minutes. Then there was silence. When we finally entered, we found mostly women and children. The flames had consumed all the oxygen. Most had suffocated before the fire reached them. It was a mercy, I suppose." The Army Chemical Warfare Service documented every combat. The flame tanks in Okinawa consumed 200,000 gallons of thickened oil. Underground fortresses that would have required weeks to clear with conventional weapons were neutralized in hours. Japanese bastions that had held up entire divisions were overcome by flame tank sections, but the cost in civilian lives was staggering. Estimates suggest that flame weapons were responsible for at least 20,000 civilian deaths in Okinawa, although exact numbers remain in dispute. The weapon that had been developed to save American lives was indiscriminate in its destruction. Colonel Unmak's flamethrower group grew from a handful of Seabees into a large military organization. Production facilities in Hawaii operated continuously. Training programs produced hundreds of flame tank operators monthly. America's industrial might had transformed Fieser's laboratory discovery into mass production. By the summer of 1945, the transformation was complete. The Pacific War had become a conflagration. The climax of the air campaign, July and August 1945. General LeMay's B-29s were now conducting incendiary strikes with mechanical precision. The target list expanded from large cities to small industrial towns. Intelligence identified 180 Japanese urban areas suitable for incendiary bombing. By the end of July, 67 cities had been attacked, with varying degrees of destruction. Some lost entire districts, others suffered damage in key industrial areas. The scope of the destruction defied comprehension. Each B-29 could carry 40 cluster bombs. A 300-plane raid could drop nearly 500,000 individual incendiary devices. Each bomb created a 15-foot diameter pool of flame that burned for 6 minutes at temperatures that could melt aluminum. Japanese firefighting doctrine had completely collapsed. Throughout July, city after city was targeted. Fukui lost 60% of its urban area on July 19th. Matsuyama saw 304 consumed on July 26th, while Tsu suffered 85% destruction on July 28th. The systematic campaign continued with industrial efficiency, each raid perfecting the techniques learned in the previous one. Japanese industrial production plummeted. Workers refused to enter factories knowing they were targets. Transportation systems collapsed as railway yards burned. Food distribution failed as warehouses were incinerated. The home front that had sustained Japan's war effort for 4 years was dying under successive waves of oil flames. Prince Fumimaro Konoe, former prime minister, wrote in his diary, "The Americans have found our weakness. We built a nation of wood and paper. Now they are burning it city by city. There is no defense against this demon fire." The Japanese military attempted countermeasures. They created fire breaks by demolishing entire city blocks. They built underground shelters with multiple exits. They distributed primitive protective equipment made of treated fabric. None of it worked. The burning oil found its way into every shelter, every hiding place, every refuge. Dr. Yoshio Nishina, Japan's leading physicist, was tasked with developing defenses. His report to Imperial General Headquarters was grim. The adhesive properties of the GL make it impossible to remove once ignited. Its combustion temperature exceeds the tolerance of our materials. The only defense is to prevent the enemy from delivering it. Since we have lost air superiority, there is no defense. August 4, 1945. Preparations for the invasion. Operation Downfall. The invasion of Japan was scheduled for November. Military planners studied the lessons of Iwo Jima and Okinawa. Japanese defensive preparations in Kyushu were extensive. Intelligence identified 10,000 caves, 5,000 bunkers, and elaborate underground networks. A conventional assault would cost an estimated 1 million American casualties. The solution was incendiary warfare on an unprecedented scale. Plans called for 75 flame tank battalions, over 4,000 tanks. Chemical units would stockpile 5 million gallons of thickened fuel. Each Marine company would have organic flamethrower squads. B-29s would carry out continuous incendiary bombings ahead of ground forces. Undersecretary of War Robert Patterson gave flame tank production the same priority as the Manhattan Project. All of America's industrial capacity was being mobilized to produce incendiary weapons, but the invasion would never occur. August 6, 1945, Hiroshima. The atomic bomb killed 70,000 instantly. The world was stunned by the destruction of a city by a single bomb. But Curtis LeMay was unimpressed. His incendiary bombing raids had already hit 67 cities, with many suffering extensive destruction. Tokyo alone had suffered more deaths than Hiroshima. The atomic bomb was spectacular, but the incendiary raids had caused more cumulative damage. August 9th, Nagasaki, another atomic bomb, another city destroyed. But that same night, 95 B-29s dropped conventional incendiaries over Yawata. The conflagration burned for 2 days. August 14th witnessed the last major raid. Even as Japanese officials discussed surrender terms, 160 B-29s attacked Kumagaya and Isesaki, with flames continuing to burn while diplomats negotiated. August 15th, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender. In his speech, he mentioned a new and cruel bomb, referring to atomic weapons. He did not mention the weapon that had destroyed more of his nation than any other. The statistics were overwhelming. Between March and August 1945, incendiary raids destroyed 180 square miles across 67 Japanese cities, killed between 300,000 and 500,000 civilians, left 8 million homeless, and eliminated 40% of industrial capacity. A 1946 report from the National Defense Research Council documented that 40,000 tons of M69 incendiary bombs were dropped on Japan during the war. The Pacific War ended not with the atomic flash, but with the dying embers of countless fires. The reckoning. Professor Louis Fieser returned to Harvard to his chemistry laboratory, where it all began. He had been decorated with the Medal for Merit, the nation's highest civilian honor. His invention had shortened the war, saved countless American lives, and revolutionized combat. But the victory was bitter. In 1967, during the Vietnam War, Fieser watched television footage of napalm attacks, children running down roads, their bodies on fire, villages incinerated. The weapon he had created to destroy enemy fortifications was being used against populated areas. In June 1972, Fieser wrote to President Nixon urging an international ban. When we developed napalm, we never thought of anti-personnel use. We were thinking of structures, fortifications. I do not have the right to judge the morality of napalm just because I invented it, but I believe its use should be restricted. Edward David Jr., Nixon's science advisor, responded that the use of napalm was difficult to predict or control, offering only that the suggestion would receive careful attention. Fieser called this a dismissal. He died in 1977. His obituary in the Harvard Gazette mentioned his work on vitamin K and anti-malarial drugs, no mention of napalm. The university had quietly erased the weapon from his official legacy. The tactical revolution was complete. The era of static fortification had ended. No bunker was safe from the flowing flames. No cave was deep enough to escape the incendiary torrent. The volcanic fortresses of the Pacific, carved from solid rock and defended with fanatical determination, had fallen to a weapon developed in a Harvard basement. The 713th Tank Battalion was deactivated. In 1946, the flame tanks were discarded, their specialized equipment destroyed. The Seabees, who created them, returned to civilian life. Colonel Unmach's flamethrower group was disbanded, its records classified. Veterans rarely spoke of what they had witnessed. Marine Corporal Raymond Hart, who served on Iwo Jima, would only say, "The flamethrowers solved the problem." Woody Williams, the last surviving Medal of Honor recipient from Iwo Jima, focused his post-war efforts on Gold Star families, never discussing the weapon that made him famous. Eugene Sledge wrote, "We thought the Japanese were cruel. Then we brought the flamethrowers. War makes monsters of everyone." The military implications were clear. Technology had surpassed determination. Chemistry had defeated courage. Industrial capacity proved more decisive than warrior spirit. The samurai tradition that had sustained Japan for centuries perished in oil flames. Modern military doctrine incorporated the lessons. All major military powers developed flame weapons. International law attempted to regulate incendiary weapons. The 1980 Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons restricted, but did not ban, their use. The weapon that had ended one war would figure in many others. The scientific legacy proved complex. Research into jellied oil led to developments in polymer chemistry, fire suppression technology, and materials science. The same aluminum soap compounds that made gasoline adhesive found applications in industry and medicine. Knowledge gained in the study of thermal effects led to advances in the treatment of burns, but moral questions remained unanswered. Was the incendiary bombing of Tokyo a war crime? Were the deaths of civilians in Okinawa justified by military necessity? Did incendiary warfare shorten the conflict enough to justify its horrors? Historians continue to debate these questions, finding no easy answers. Japanese survivors formed the Association of Tokyo Air Raid Victims, documenting testimonies, preserving memories. Museums in Tokyo, Osaka, and Kobe display melted artifacts, photographs of the devastation, and lists of victims. School children learn about the night of black snow, when burning debris fell like a dark precipitation. The transformation of war was complete. The Pacific War had begun with torpedo planes at Pearl Harbor and ended with the systematic incineration of Japan. Between these events, the nature of combat had fundamentally changed. Individual skill and courage still mattered, but technology and industrial production determined the outcomes. In the caves of Iwo Jima, coral formations show burn marks from flame tanks still visible 8 decades later. In Okinawa, sealed caves contain the remains of those who chose death over surrender to the flames. In Tokyo, memorial parks mark areas where entire neighborhoods disappeared in single nights. Professor Fieser's formula was elegantly simple: aluminum naphthenate plus aluminum palmitate plus gasoline equals napalm. The calculation of war had become chemistry. The chemistry of destruction had become industrial production. The era of limited war was over. Standing in the ruins of Tokyo in September 1945, General Curtis LeMay inspected the devastation. "We scorched, boiled, and baked to death more people in Tokyo that night than went up in vapor in Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined," he observed. But it was war. They started it. We finished it. The Pacific Ocean had witnessed the birth of modern total war, not through atomic weapons that grabbed the headlines, but through a humble gel that burned inextinguishably. Napalm had changed war forever. The weapon born in a Harvard basement had killed more Japanese than any other American weapon. It had consumed a nation that believed itself divinely protected. The strategic bombing survey conducted after the war reached a harsh conclusion. Japan would have surrendered by November 1945 even without the atomic bombs, even without the Soviet entry. The systematic campaign of incendiary bombing, more than any other factor, had broken Japan's capacity to continue fighting. For the scientists who developed these weapons, the moral burden proved heavy. Louis Fieser was not alone in his regrets. Many chemists and engineers who worked on incendiary weapons struggled with the consequences of their creations. The Seabees who modified the flame tanks left few records. These construction battalions trained to build had become instruments of destruction. For Japanese survivors, the trauma lasted generations. Children who fled through flaming streets grew up with recurring nightmares. The smell of gasoline could trigger panic attacks decades later. Burn scars served as permanent reminders. However, from this destruction came an unexpected outcome. The same Japan, reduced to ashes by American incendiary bombing, would become one of America's strongest allies. The cities that had been incinerated rose again as centers of commerce and culture. Tokyo, which suffered the most devastating individual attack in history, became one of the world's great metropolises. In military academies around the world, the Pacific incendiary bombing campaign is studied both as a masterpiece of strategic execution and as a cautionary tale about the nature of total war. The integration of tactical and strategic incendiary warfare showed how a single weapon system could scale from individual bunkers to entire cities. Modern international law has attempted to address these issues. The Protocol on Prohibitions or Restrictions on the Use of Incendiary Weapons, adopted in 1980, restricts, but does not eliminate, their use. military necessity still frequently outweighs humanitarian concerns. In Japan, the memory of incendiary bombing serves different purposes. For some, it is a reminder of the consequences of militarism. For others, evidence of the brutality of war. For most, simply a human tragedy that must never be repeated. Annual commemorations feature fewer survivors each year. The American memory of incendiary bombing is more ambiguous. Atomic bombings dominate the narrative. The systematic incineration that killed more is reduced to footnotes. This selective memory serves a purpose. It is easier to deal with 2 atomic bombs than with months of systematic incendiary bombing. The technological progression from Fieser's lab to the ruins of Tokyo took only 3 years. In that time, napalm evolved from a curiosity to the most destructive conventional weapon deployed. Today, napalm and its derivatives remain in military arsenals, the principle unchanged. Jellied fuel that sticks and burns. Professor Fieser spent his final years teaching and writing chemistry books with his wife, Mary. He rarely spoke of napalm, preferring to focus on other achievements, but the weight of his creation never left him. In private moments, he wondered what might have been different. They were useless questions. He knew. If it hadn't been him, it would have been someone else. The chemistry was too simple, the military necessity too great, the industrial capacity too vast. The weapon was inevitable once modern chemistry met modern warfare. The fundamental truth revealed by the use of napalm remains. In total war, there are no limits to human ingenuity in creating destruction. The same industrial capacity that improves life can be turned toward ending it massively. As the last survivors pass away, their memories become history. Burn scars fade, destroyed cities are rebuilt, trauma is processed, but the capacity for such destruction remains. The war ended, the flames died, but the questions napalm raised continue to burn. The lesson was clear. In the era of total war, victory belonged to those who could produce the most terrible weapons and possessed the will to use them. Japan's defensive positions, carved in volcanic rock and defended with suicidal courage, collapsed under the American incendiary assault. The Fortress Pacific had burned, and from its ashes emerged the modern world, forever changed by a weapon born in a university laboratory, tested on a football field, and deployed across an ocean of islands until it consumed an empire.